Before we dig into today's episode, I wanted to let you know a little bit about my new program, Shame-Free Parenting. We're going to be focusing on elementary aged kids for now. And this is not a teaching program. You're not going to come in and learn a bunch of stuff. You've probably already read a lot of parenting books or taken parenting trainings in the past. This isn't something that you're going to come into and learn from. This is something that is going to change you at a core level so that you won't just know how to parent in a more shame-free way. You will do it. By the end of this program, you will be able to parent in a way that you are proud of. You'll be able to know how to build shame resiliency in yourself and in your kids. You will be able to parent in a way that teaches your children that all of their emotions are valid, that all of their emotions are okay, that they are okay. You will believe your kids. You will trust in your kids. You will feel so good about the way that you show up in parenting. And the times that you don't, you will know how to process those immediately and reconnect with your kids through them and use those as learning experiences for not only your kids, but especially for you. If this sounds like something that you're interested in, hop down to the show notes, pop on the link below, or go to coachcrystal.ca/group. Welcome to the Parenting Coach Podcast with Crystal. Over 7 years ago, I felt like I was stuck in this cycle of yelling and reactivity in my parenting that I did not want to be in, but I didn't know how to get out of. I knew how I wanted to parent pretty much exactly, and I'd spent hours reading books, but not finding a way to show up how I wanted to. That's when I started to turn inwards. My own inward journey was what my family needed. As I changed, everything around me changed. My kids' meltdowns decreased by 90% or more with no medications or therapy. I stopped yelling, sibling fighting became almost entirely non-existent, and I found that this change flowed into other areas of my life too. My intuition increased. I started to run my life and business in a very different way. If this sounds like something you want to, I can help. Join me each week as I share my journey, including the laughter, fun, hard times, and tears. Tune in for support, guidance, and fun conversations with my favorite experts, and really anything else that interests me too. Rewriting Your Birth Story with Nicole Lawrence. Our birth stories are inextricably linked to other areas of our lives. And as we recognize our own birth stories, whether for good or bad, and choose to rewrite them, it can add confidence and peace to our parenting and motherhood. Nicole Lawrence is a mother, writer, visionary, and host of the podcast Rebirth, with a mission to alchemize birth stories and the stories we bring to motherhood into fertile soil for evolving our mothering and our lineage. In this powerful episode, we share how our birth stories impacted us for good or bad, how to rewrite our stories and recognize the impact they may have had. Nicole shares some beautiful stories of women who have rewritten their stories and how it changes things for them, how to prep for your upcoming birth on a soul level, and what your birthing plan may help to include. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. Today, we have been having so many fun interviews lately. Like every single one, I'm like, this is so fun. This is so fun. This is my favorite. They're all my favorite. And so I met Nicole. You're going to be introduced to her in just a moment. I met her at a hypnosis conference in Las Vegas, which is so fun. And I was talking to her about what she does. And I was like, ooh, we have to have this conversation on the podcast because it's so good. There's a few people I met down there where I was like, oh, this will make a really good episode. So thank you for being with us today, Nicole.
Thank you for having me here, Crystal. It was like we were saying before we started recording, that conference was just full of great people and great energy and service to the world.
So good. Every single conversation I had, I was like, oh, this is so good. The whole time was so good. Okay. So tell us, Nicole, a little bit about you, what you do, and also just a short kind of story about how you got to be here.
I'll just start right.
Tell me your whole life story in 2 minutes. No.
Oh gosh.
However you want to go.
Where do I begin? Okay. Well, I started, my professional background back in 2014. I began as a yoga teacher and then started wondering why I like to connect the dots. So I started getting into more somatic-based trainings to figure out how yoga was working on me and my emotions and my viscera, right? Not just my body, but my mind, not just flexibility, but flexibility in my mind, and, I could go into that much more deeply, but I started getting into attachment work and, I started just using somatics to heal my life and heal my heart and heal my mind. And, then I started coaching. I started working with women to, claim their boundaries, to use their voice, to feel safe in their bodies and safe in the way that they were showing up in the world. So I started holding women's circles. And then, of course, 2020 moved everything online.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my start. 2020 was also when I became pregnant with my first child.
Mm-hmm.
And I really went inward and, like a true type A, went to studying everything I could, reading all the books, podcasts. I really wanted to do it right. I really wanted to do right by my son. I really wanted to get it right.
Mm-hmm.
And birth is a mystery. It's a mystery portal.
Yep.
And it didn't go the way that I had envisioned it in my mind. And so for the first 3 months of my son's life, I felt like I noticed that I was checked out. I wasn't really showing up. I was very out of body. And not just because of the shock of just being a new parent in general, but there was something um, that I wasn't connecting to. And I was like, well, maybe it's time for me to revisit my story or visit it, you know. And so I was reading The Fourth Trimester from Kimberly Ann Johnson, who I had also learned from years prior. And she has a chapter in there called Owning Your Birth Story.
Mm-hmm.
And in that chapter, which I decided to open a couple months after, I was like, all right, I'll try to face the music here. The first paragraph was talking about all this work that I'm about to talk about is Pam England's work from Birth Story Medicine. And this is what, all the credit goes to her. I was like, well, I guess I'm just going to skip this chapter and go straight to her website. So, long story short, I found Pam England via Kimberly Ann Johnson. And the next day, I got an email newsletter from Pam and Birth Story Medicine saying we're looking for volunteers to tell birth stories for our people who are graduating with the certification of being birth story listeners. So I reached out to her, said a little bit about my background and that I was volunteering myself and my husband because other parents, also birth workers, also carry stories about births they witness. And she said, I'm going to give you a call. Let's talk. Anyway, I had one session with her and I was actually going into it really skeptical because I'm a somatically trained, background. I was thinking I was going to have to go through years of therapy and process things, through my body as well as speaking. And an hour and a half session totally flipped my story on its head to where I could not tell it the same. And, I was shocked. And I mean, reeling from that, just saying like, how did this, it just blew my mind open. And I was like, this is where my calling is. I need to learn this. I need to like give back and serve in this way. Like this is so necessary and so needed. I just felt the power of it. And when your story shifts, your behavior shifts. When your beliefs shift, your mindset shifts, your actions shift. Like everything in your life shifts around what's the stories that are going and playing through your head. And I know that your listeners and your people know this. If you're listening, this is not a new concept. But I just noticed such a ease and a peace and just a difference in how I thought of myself as a woman and as a mother. And that just fed into how I was showing up with my new baby and how I felt, even in my body. And this is what I noticed too, 3 years later with my clients. And this, when they, give me feedback about what's happening now in their life, these are the types of changes that they notice. It's just more peace, more confidence, more ease. They notice the way that they're compassionate with themselves where they once were, not. And just this freedom that comes with liberating the story about their birth and how they believe it was, or the meanings that they associated with it.
That's
So,
beautiful. I was just recently doing by the time this airs, it's going to be a little bit not as recent, but I was doing a parenting workshop called Shame-Free Parenting, and we talked about unshaming our parenting, how it kind of came from our own childhood and releasing all these stories and similar to what you're talking about. And one thing that I shared that I've noticed in every single one of my clients, including my own self, as I'm my own first client, is that anytime we do this work of bringing compassion and acceptance and love to ourselves in one arena, that it can't not spread to all the other arenas of our life. And Brene Brown said, owning our story and writing a brave new ending. And that's what I thought of when I heard you share that, is that it's like collecting the story, noticing what our birth story is, and also writing it in this new way, in this way that's compassionate and loving. And yeah.
Absolutely. And stories are not fixed. And we know this when we revisit it. We do inner child work and shadow work. And for some reason, I don't see that really happening with birth stories, even though they are a story. And it's so intrinsically tied into our whole life story. That's why you can have a birth with similar details in 100 different ways that it's perceived and told.
Mm-hmm.
Because we are the vessel that we experience it. We add meaning to it. We carry it. We have the inner dialogue, back and forth, especially when things don't go the way that we expected, or, the way that we envisioned. We call it the revolving door. What if I did this? What if we did this? What if she did this? And, what if I had done a different choice? And it consumes energy, consumes us. And it's like a vicious cycle, spiral. And I'm not just talking about birth, of course. This could be applied to any story, any situation, anything that you find in the spin cycle of your mind. But yeah, I think because birth has been in the overculture has been medicalized, we think about it as a single medical event and not a part of the tapestry of our life story. And it really is intrinsically woven into our beliefs about ourselves, our beliefs about how we should show up and how we shouldn't, and our, who we want to belong to, what kind of groups we want to belong to. We think about, our associations with good mom, bad mom. It's so tied in with that. And social media, and there's not a lot of room for nuance, especially when we're preparing for birth. We're going in as, and with an innocence of like, tell me the way, show me the way. And there's not a lot
one
of
right way too, right? Like you went in, you're like, I got to do it this right way.
And there's just not a lot of nuance to it. And I think it's also part of just an innocence in our culture, and a lot of training or culturally ingrained like hierarchies, and a lot of listen to this authority, and but then the problem with that, because of course there are times where you want to be guided and you need to be guided by a professional who's caring for you. But the problem with that is then we flip on ourselves afterwards and say, if I only knew better, if I only would have spoke up. And, we use that innocence against ourselves. And, there's what I started noticing is that there is ways that we can prepare for birth in a more mature, evolved way that is not so black and white, that cultivates our inner resources and not just like, strict beliefs of absolutes of what it should look like.
Yeah. And I think the reason your message resonated so much with me is that this isn't an area that I've really delved into a lot. Like I've done so much reframing stories work in pretty much every area of my life. And I was like, yeah, it didn't even occur to me that birth is so significant. And it's not one that I've really spent any time reframing or looking at. Because it's been a long time. My most recent birth was 8 years ago, and my most not recent one was 17 years ago. So it's been quite a while. But to see that is so woven in, because everything is, like you said,
exactly.
Tapestry, and you pull a thread and it, goes everywhere. So do you help people now with reframing their birth stories, or do you help them prepare themselves for a birth that is more open to all the different flexible pieces of how it might go, or both?
Both, because they're intrinsically woven. I would love to help more women in the prenatal end, but that's hard. It's hard because, again, the innocence that I don't know if I would have been how I would have found someone like me when I was like looking
or even
for
known like that's something that's needed. Like a spiritual preparation for this, like, portal
Yeah.
that is going to happen. You're just like, oh no, I'm just going to have a baby. Like, I'm just like, that's just what happens.
Yeah. And
Um,
things that you don't think would come up, like when I was in labor. So I lost my mom when I was young
mm,
and like 7. And I had many different moms figures step in, but when I was in labor, that's all I wanted was my mom, my
mm,
real mom. And I was like, how could I prepare for this? Like, this is a, what?
mm,
This is like out of left field. And I thought, oh yeah, I've already like grieved that. I've already processed. No,
mm,
like that was, a wild card. And
mm,
so things like that often come up of under the surface, you have anxiety about, what, the golden hour, and how you're going to get that sacred time. But really, it's about this deeper connection with how you want to show up as a mother and wanting
mm.
to give the things that maybe you didn't have or you aren't able to have currently. And that was really what was true for me. And that really mattered to me because I wanted my son to be born into loving arms and I wanted him to know his mother was here, you know, for him. And yeah, that was part of the story of the things that I thought I missed out on. Um, so
Yeah.
reframing that has been really powerful.
So there was one thing that you mentioned before the podcast that I want to make sure we hit on. And like,
Hmm.
when you feel like the people that come to you usually kind of feel a pull, they kind of feel like they know that this is something they want to work on. And you mentioned the term post traumatic growth. Let's dig into that a little bit. What does that look like for you? How do you know when people are kind of ready for this? What does that look like? And how can they use these kind of traumas as growth?
Yeah, so there's many different evolutions of a story. They're constantly changing. We know that story follows state. Story is dependent on kind of what the mindset is in our brain and also in our bodies. And so when you're fresh out of birth, let's say, and fresh out of the portal, everything is kind of like woozy. Your story is still coming together. You're not really conscious of it. You're very much in the thick of it, even in the first couple of weeks, even if you're not aware of it. And then you start to feel probably relief that you got through it, no matter how it
Mhm.
turned out. And then you might start thinking about, okay, who was there? Who showed up for me? Who didn't show up for me? Which person did am I angry at? Which person am I
Mhm.
blaming? Which person, and then so attachment really comes into play here in the
Mhm.
ways that, you expect people to show up and things you asked for or didn't get or didn't ask for, um, the ways that people showed up for you. And then you also have, okay, you start to talk about the story. So you start to kind of form it together with social stories. And this is also, say, if you have a doula or a midwife or your OB starts to talk to you about what they witnessed, that could become part of your social story, even though it might not be like something that you were even aware of before. It's you start to kind of put together your story based on, all the inputs that you have
Mhm.
both within you and outside of you. Then you might start to put together a medical story. This is the facts, this is the timeline, this is because your brain is trying to sort through and put together like in a little contained, way to try to tell the story because you're realizing that you're being asked for it. And so that's the medical story. But then there's deeper layers of it. And this is where a lot of women don't venture because we're not given space or time or a place to venture there. And that's like the story beneath the story.
Mm.
So that's what I mentioned the revolving door earlier. And that's all the what ifs and all of the like places where you're begging for a redo in your mind and, just the revolving door of like, I should have, I wish I did, or they should have, or why didn't I? All those wonderings. And that's where a lot of women get caught. And that can be a really hard place to be. That's where, I go to, I feel like I'm a magnet for birth stories. I go to, the grocery store and a 60-year-old woman will start talking about her birth story to me.
Mm.
Or I roll up my yoga mat and I'll, hear something
They
happening
just
with,
energetically can feel it from you. They're like, this is
I
a
guess.
for my story.
I guess, but this is why women decades later are still talking about their birth story because it's in a revolving door. It's stuck.
Mhm.
You can't decide what is true. You can't decide if it would have been different had you go back. Like there's something unsettled in your mind. And you might start to talk about those things. You might start to share them, but only with certain people. But you know that something has shifted in your story, and it feels like you're aware of something deeper there, but you're still talking about, well, I had a C-section and it was scary, but you don't really get to like, why was it scary? What was it like for you? It's, what did you learn about yourself? How did you get through it? What did you have to release in order to go through that? Like, what was going through your mind? All those different, like, deeper questions. So I typically meet women at this stage where they're hunting for new meaning. They're hunting for self-acceptance. They're hunting for a better story to tell themselves, not really to go share it with the world, but like a better story to carry, a better story to share with their kids, a better story that doesn't feel so heavy, that doesn't capture their energy and like, just feel tight and constrained. And then sometimes really quickly through this process of birth story medicine and the way I work, sometimes with a couple sessions, sometimes over time, the story starts to unravel and we get to self-love and compassion. And just like you were saying with the work you're doing with shame, it really is unshaming work because it really comes down to the story that you're telling yourself about yourself and the meanings that you're assigning to what happened. And so we don't change the facts. Of course, we can't go back in time with a time machine, but we can relate to it in a different way and we can see it differently. And sometimes that's really hard to just do by yourself. So what my process does is just shine a light. We find directly what the pain point is, what the image, what the feeling is that's causing the strife and the swirl in your mind. And then we work with that. And so just finding that needle, sometimes in the haystack of all your thoughts is like blows the story open. Just finding out what you're telling to yourself sometimes blows the story open. Just looking at it. And then once we find it, we start not questioning it, but like looking at it from different angles.
I feel like we should do this. I'm like, okay, so let's just do like 5 minutes. I mean, I know normally your sessions are really long, but I think that it'll be helpful for people to see what you mean by that. And either maybe you already have like a story, but if not, we can just go through it with me and be like, okay, wait, what does this look like in real time? Like, how does reframing a story help you feel compassionate? Would it be easier for you to do it on me or just to kind of explain something that's happened?
Are you talking about specifically your birth story or
my birth story specifically, or just like reframing something like either from your story or from your client stories, like kind of share an example of what that would look like or go through and use me as an example so people kind of get what we're saying.
Well, I can tell a story.
Yeah.
Okay. So I had a session recently with actually someone who I met at this conference that we both met at. And it was absolutely beautiful. It was one of those that just one session, and it was, and I don't judge sessions based on how long it takes. So I don't want to put that out there for anyone to misinterpret, but the realization that came through for her was really beautiful. And she came in saying, similar to me, I was my first baby and I really wanted, a natural birth that, I wanted her to be put on my chest right away. And I just wanted this peace, and it wasn't that. It was chaotic. They thought she wasn't breathing when she first came out, even though she was, but, there was a lot of tension in the room. And the baby got taken quickly and she didn't know if she was alive or, what was happening. No one was communicating with her. And, but before that, actually, I missed one part. When she was pushing, she didn't feel the need to push, but the doctor paused her and said, push now. So, and she, questioned it, and she's like, now, and then she just did it. So, and then she tore a little bit. Okay. So it sounds like there was a medical reason for that, to get the baby out right at the crowning phase. I don't need to go into the medical details. I don't need to go in and see if the doctor was right or wrong. That's not the issue. The issue is how she felt about it and what she perceives that she lost, and what that meant for her as a woman and her ability to give birth. So she, so we went back, we did a visualization, and her subconscious gave me this moment that we talked about. So there was a whole birth story in there that we listened to for a few minutes, but this was the moment where she chose, where the OB said, push now. And even though she didn't feel it, she pushed and she listened. Even though she didn't have the impulse, she listened, and she was judging herself for not listening to herself and listening to the OB instead. And so we worked with that. And she came to the realization of just reframing for herself that she didn't fail her baby. She didn't let go. She didn't lose touch with her intuition, that something in her did say, okay, I actually need to follow. Like I can sense the urgency. I need to do this right now. Even though I don't feel it, I'm going to, do what I'm being asked to do. And she said, and it was so beautiful. She said, instead of losing this moment, of feeling empowered when I pushed out my baby, I noticed that it's a time where I was being called forward to do the thing that, I told myself I didn't want to do, which was not listen to her body. She perceived she wasn't listening to her body, but she saw it as, I got my baby out as necessary. She's healthy. And she was in tears, and she realized that, and the tear healed. It was a sacrifice that, was made, and her body healed it, and, things are meant to expand as well as our bodies. And, again, we can get so caught up in being real focused on blame and us against the medical system, and, us against even other women in the ways that are right and wrong. But when it really comes down to it, is how we interpret things for ourselves. And, this story, when we reframe birth, even before we give birth, as initiation. And in initiations, you meet your shadow. You meet the thing. You meet the part of you that needs to do the one forbidden thing that you don't picture yourself or want yourself to do. And in this case, it was, not listening to her body. But there was a wisdom there that she also listened to, was, I need to do this. And, if she has other questions about exactly what happened, she can go back to her provider and ask. But it's really, and we know that we get to the part where the deeper truth lies when there's emotion and release, and like this knowing that just kind of takes you over. And I've even had women who have come to me. There's one woman that I can think of right now who was a really, she was an athlete, and she was like her crown, like her identity was on her body and her abilities. And she had a hard time giving birth. But it's still textbook. Like her doula, like home birth, her doula said this is the easiest, like smoothest birth I ever witnessed, but she still judged herself because she had a difficult time. And so she needs to reframe that for herself. So like, it doesn't matter how it looks on the outside. It's really all about how the story that we're telling ourselves and what we're carrying on the inside. And, she was saying how, well, like, I was having such a hard time giving birth. Like, how am I going to be a mom? Like, this is going to be so hard. And, she said she felt such a renewed confidence and realizing that, she can she can do hard things, and she can also struggle through things.
Mm-hmm.
And
I love those stories. I think they're so beautiful. I think that like it's one thing to be like, yeah, and then we rewrite the stories and like then they feel better. But like to share those such beautiful examples of like, this is the story that came out of this birth. And like you
yeah,
can imagine how that's affecting them and affecting their motherhood and their parenting and other areas of their life. And for them to make that what seems like kind of a subtle shift in story made such a big difference for them emotionally and then going forward in their motherhood and parenting. Um,
right. And
so I
this,
love that.
one of the women too was preparing for her second birth. And so releasing that
Mm-hmm.
and reframing that for herself is going to serve her like so beautifully in
So
the way
well.
that she shows up, but also tells her next birth story. And that's why I love working
Mhm.
prenatally.
Okay, my next question, like
Yeah.
we only have time for this one before we go, but my next
Hmm.
question was going to be for somebody that maybe hasn't had a baby, that they don't need to like go back and reframe, but they do want to prepare for their birth. What is something you could share with them in a way that they could prepare that's maybe not the physical preparations we're doing for birth normally, but this prepare for a really beautiful, flexible, more nuanced birth story?
Yeah. I I've been thinking about this a lot lately. And I was thinking about like, what would my birth plan be if, and I guess I can use myself as an example with my second birth, because I went on to have another baby and birth. But my birth plan would be um, more about taking the best care I can for myself. And that doesn't just mean my body, but also my mind, like being really nice to
Mm,
myself, really compassionate, because really, the more you love yourself and the more compassion you have for yourself and your humanness, things can happen in your life, and you can, things can go unexpectedly, and you can rise from it, and you can learn from it, and you can take it on into your life. From when you go through the birth portal, though, understand that it's a mystery. And just like anything in life, we can prepare. If the secret to an empowered birth was preparation only, like we would have a society full of like empowered births, but we just
yes.
don't, because things happen that are out of our control.
Mhm.
And I understand that, like, there's a lot of nice memes and quotes being passed around on Instagram about that, and people seem to get it when it's about life, but not about birth. It's like,
Mhm.
no, you can't take that from me. They cling on to the control so much in birth, and I think it's because under all of this, we realize how like mysterious it is
Mhm.
and how we can't control it, and it feels so personal and important to us as women. It's like it happens, it's so personal because it literally happens within us and through
Mhm.
us. And it's such a full body, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual experience that just, you know, has the potential to change your life. And I say potential because not everyone views it that way, and that's okay. And if you do, then know that this is a mystery school, just like life. Approach it in the best way that you can, that you know how, and know that you're going to be surprised. It's going to take you places that you do not know. That is for sure. Plan
Mhm.
on being surprised.
Yeah.
The other thing is plan for allies to show up that you didn't expect as well.
Mm.
I Anyone who's given birth, I want you to pause and think of an ally that showed up that you didn't plan for.
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah,
That like one nurse who's like,
exactly.
just like even like tears to my eyes. I'm like, oh, this lady that was like in her 70s and she'd retired, but she just comes back for fun and used to be like a midwife or something. Anyways, she had all this experience and wisdom that the other nurses didn't. And I think that there's always those people that come
There's
in.
always those people. And you think of yourself as uh, not a patient, but as a huntress or a seeker, or
Mm,
like a wisdom keeper, like on her path trying to um, gain knowledge from this experience and not to conquer it or
mm.
overcome it. I think that whole frame of mind can be really powerful. So it's a
Really
simple,
open
but
yourself up to the experience instead of a hurdle or a challenge you have to get over.
Yeah, when I was preparing, I look back my first birth, like I was really feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. Like it felt really much like very heavy, felt like do or
Mhm.
die. If I
Yeah.
don't get this right, like the consequences are
What does it mean about
huge.
me? What's going to happen to my baby? Yeah, all the things.
Yeah. Yeah. How am I gonna face the world if I don't get
Mhm.
this right? And gosh, like that's so heavy. And that's so heavy to carry in the moment. And also afterwards, and I
Mhm.
just think we're setting ourselves up for stories that are difficult. Um, if we just dwell in like super positive thinking or
Mhm.
kind of fantasy, because it is fantasy because it hasn't occurred yet. So
We don't know.
you
Mhm.
have an image of the fantasy. And
Mhm.
so the more nuance, the more openness we can bring. And of course, that that requires us to really let go and that really like to deepen into uncertainty and to have difficult
Yeah.
conversations and to tune into what our yes and our no is. And there's
This
all
just
kinds of
sounds like life, right? You're like, isn't this the
yes,
lesson of life that birth is
life
also a
school.
lesson? Like,
Yes, you absolutely get it. Thank you.
yes, all of that, all of those
And if
things.
you could go into motherhood with all these lessons, I
Mhm.
mean,
Yeah. How beautiful. How beautiful that is. Okay. This has been a lovely conversation. Thank you for
yes.
that. And I think that people will listen to this and feel really prepared in either restorying their birth story. I don't know how you say that. How do you tell people what you do?
I like to say I do liberation work.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah. And also, I think helping prepare them for what's to come, maybe another baby, maybe their first. I think it's a really beautiful preparation you can do. It's like the soul preparation while you're doing the physical preparation of like getting your hospital bag ready and writing out your birth plan. You can also add in this emotional, mental, spiritual piece. So, thank you so much for being here, Nicole. If people want to connect with you and do this liberation work on themselves and their story, reframe their story with you, how do they find you?
Yeah. The best way right now is rebirthformothers.com. That's my website. You can learn more about me and what I offer there. Send me a message. Yeah. I'm also on Instagram, although it's been a while. I'm in my own little portal right now, but
Yeah,
here I am
you're
stepping
here.
out, talking to you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I'm sure people will make their way to you if they feel like they're in this space and wanting to use their experiences for growth, wanting to get that post-traumatic growth from it. Um, I love this work. I love the work that you do. And thanks for being willing to come and share.
Yeah. It's got a lot of alignments. You're just a
Mhm.
little further down the road.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, I would love for you to help spread the word by getting this message of support and guidance out to as many people as possible. So text it to your best friend or tag me on Instagram and share it. Leave a review, rate it, subscribe it, or follow on your favorite platform. Send me a DM on IG letting me know which parts have impacted you or what you'd like to see on future episodes. We'll see you next week.